All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about getting consensus and moving forward without 100% agreement, what that looks like, and some strategies and tactics that we're going to go through that will help our attendees in their own companies, and some questions to start asking as you think about implementing these strategies on your own. So we want to be efficient with your time today. We've scheduled a full hour. If you look at your calendars, we're going to get right into the content, but just know that we're going to jump right into it, and we may end a little bit early and give you back some of your time depending on the questions that we receive live. So before you leave today, you're going to have several insights that we're going to talk about and questions to ask your team. So those insights that we're going to be diving into, one is why delays can be costly to your organization, strategies to get the team together around a key decision, and then the third is shifting perspectives and how shifting perspectives about moving from "it's about me" to "it's about us." Now, welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us. And one of the things I wanted to make sure we cover is that we will be highlighting those topics that I just went over. Those three topics. We'll be highlighting the questions that you can ask yourself and your team. But know that we will be providing some information after the webinar, most likely next week, with those questions, with additional questions and insights. And if we receive any questions live on the webinar today that we don't have time to get to, then we'll answer those questions in the follow-up download as well.
Hey, Don, all this is free? Are we giving all this away for free?
We're giving it all away for free because we're givers, Mark. We are. I know you are. So Mark Wolf, thank you for joining us. You saw the information there on the slide before that went away. And Mark is president of Mark A. Wolf Enterprises, and I'm president, Don Baham, of Craft Technology Group, and we are glad to be here today. So first thing I want to do, I want to get some interaction with our audience out there. So find the chat function in webinar in your browser. Should be pretty straightforward. Look for the chat function, click on that, and what I want to hear from our audience is what city and state you're located in and what industry you represent or where you work. Maybe it's nonprofit, maybe it's financial services, healthcare, whatever industry you're working in and what city and state you're in. I want to get some interaction and figure out where our audience is today. Also, want to give you a heads up. There are going to be two or three, probably just the two poll questions that we're going to be presenting throughout the webinar. So be on the lookout for that. We'll kind of announce it. It should be obvious where it shows up. We'll look for a couple poll questions as well. All right, Mark, what are you seeing come in there on the chat? Let's see.
We got some manufacturing. We have healthcare. We got more manufacturing. We have some nonprofits in here. Some people are thrilled that it's free. You know, I mean, that's always good.
We got folks in Nashville. We've got folks in Utah. All right. Kentucky.
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Charlotte, North Carolina. Okay. Law firms.
We got some Franklin. We got some people from Nashville.
Excellent.
Yeah, so well attended and diverse. And you know what I'm seeing is that these industries, I mean, the difference between electronics recycling in Wisconsin versus a nonprofit in Nashville, they're all here for the same reason, which is trying to get from, can we get agreement, to actually getting consensus, right? Just moving something ahead. So if the goal is consensus, let's talk about what that starts to look like, because agreement is critical. So Don, you know what? In work, we talk about consensus and trying to move forward in leadership. So you have a family, I have a family. How many times have you ever recommended a restaurant and got 100% agreement 100% of the time? Is that the normal way that it works even outside of work?
I think it goes something like, well, where do you want to eat? Well, I don't have a preference. Okay, let's eat here. No, I don't want to eat there. Oh, okay. I got it. Yeah, it is. It's obviously ubiquitous. Whether it's you're talking about personal or professional life, getting consensus is not necessarily easy, and you don't necessarily need 100% agreement. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I think the strategies here, what I'll say kind of about that comment is the strategies we're going to talk about and we're going to learn today can be applied in a variety of settings. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. And the thing is that when it comes to business, it's really about leadership, right? It's about good leaders actually say, we're going to go on this journey with everyone. So when you look at that funny restaurant example, right, you're part of that journey, right? So if you disagree, you're still part of it, but it's not always about a one-time journey. You're going to eat again. Oh, by the way, your companies are going to make decisions again. So let's really define what consensus is and what it's not, so we can be really clear. So even though we're trying to get for 100% agreement with our teams, with leadership, with what our initiatives are in our organization, profit or nonprofit, it's not always possible. And what we're looking for with consensus, at least, is the best agreement at that moment. So sometimes decisions have to be made that are timely, and not everyone is on board with exactly the way it works. But the thing is that consensus means at least I was heard, at least I was part of it, and this is the best effort that could be put together. So let's go on that journey and figure out how that happens and some of the mistakes that happen when it doesn't really work well. So Don, let's look at point number one, since we promised everybody we'd get right into it. Why delays can be costly for your organization. You got any examples of that?
I do. When I think about, delays being costly to an organization, I think of an example that of an organization that could have avoided at least $1 million, if not more, in a mistake that they could have avoided if they had been able to come to consensus and some sort of an agreement. Okay. So we're talking about at least $1 million price tag, probably more. And this is an example that I think is applicable regardless of industry. This example happened in a municipality. It happened to be IT related, but its principles can be applied regardless of the position you're in or the industry that it happened in. And so I don't know Brian Hawkins personally. He was a former IT director in a small business or small municipality in Florida. And he was responsible for critical servers and applications that had to be operating 24/7. As you can imagine, in the local government, you've got services that have to be available, right? But it wasn't a large organization. And so when you think about how this could be applied or if this was in a larger enterprise, that $1 million price tag could be multiplied multiple times over. So Brian Hawkins, former IT director, let me tell you about that story. In 2017, Brian recognized a gap in the disaster recovery capabilities of the organization, meaning he knew that if a disaster happened, the ability for the business to operate using their technology would be severely impacted because the solutions and tools were not in place for them to be able to recover quickly. So if something bad happened to the servers, he knew that it was going to be extremely difficult to recover those servers and get the applications and the city services back up and running. So what did he do? Like a good IT director does, he makes a recommendation. This is the budget I need. These are the features and tools that I'm going to be receiving because of the budget you're going to give me, and I'll be able to recover our servers if something bad were to happen. And what do you think happened?
Did something bad happen?
Something
what are
bad
chances?
Yeah, he wasn't given the budget. I mean, that's the first bad thing. And then fast forward 2 years later, and employees at the city, several employees clicked on a phishing email, got ransomware in the network, brought the network to its knees, and it took weeks to recover the data. They paid the ransom to the bad guys. They rolled the dice because they didn't have the backups in place. They got some data back, not all of it. Even with paying the ransom, it took weeks and it crippled the city for a while. And ultimately, Brian lost his job. So not only did they pay about $500,000 in the ransom, downtime. Now Brian is suing the city, so there's ongoing litigation. This is a costly event, and I think there's something to be learned here about maybe how that budget was asked for, and how he approached the leadership team, and how the leadership team received that information to determine what was the right path forward. So I say that example to say, yes, this can happen in a small business, this can happen in a large enterprise, and I think there certainly that is a quantifiable cost to an organization by delaying that decision for a better disaster recovery solution. Mark, what are you seeing out there when you see organizations delay decisions?
Well, I see that when organizations don't understand what the reason is, right? So they're not clear on why we need to spend this money. So, with Brian's story, we don't really know him, right? So we don't know the whole story, but we know what the result was, right? And so as a company, as a leader, you get to see what the result is. This was very public. Now, this was a municipality. There was a lot of other things going on. And now, how about if there was public information that was stolen? How about if there was data that they had access to, these bad guys, where they actually published it? How about if other things happen? So it's not just a ramification of it being downtime. It's not just the problems of what goes on. There's other things. And what could have this IT director done to be able to help and do more? So,
I think about that, and you brought up a good point is, again, we don't know the specifics, but I would hypothesize that he may not have brought in any additional support, right? If he felt that he did not have, I guess, the juice to pull off the ask, he could have done a couple things. One, either cultivated some outside expertise and some advocates on the decision-making team, either by working those relationships or bringing in maybe an outside expertise that gives them a perspective that they don't have internally. And I don't know that he did that, but I would guess that he did not, and that certainly could have turned the tables.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is don't do it alone. And that brings me to a story of when, imagine being the person that said no to a world-changing idea. Okay, so just think about that for a second. You may have not heard of, unless you're kind of a computer-esque person that cares about Macintosh, but this guy named Steve Wozniak. Maybe you heard of him. Well, he was the co-founder of Apple. Most people heard of Steve Jobs, but not Wozniak as much. Well, Wozniak used to work for Hewlett-Packard. And when he worked for HP back in the 70s, yes, I was alive in the 70s. Don, were you alive in the 70s?
Just barely.
Okay. So when he was alive in the 70s, he was working for HP, and they were actually, he was working on calculators, because calculators were a big thing back then in the 70s. Go figure. Well, he came up with this concept that he kind of built on his own for this computer, and he actually built it, and he was what we call now as an entrepreneur. There's someone inside an organization that comes up with great ideas. He actually offered it to HP and said, hey, listen, I got this great idea for a computer. Can you want to work with it? Take it, do it. And they were like, no. Well, he begged them. He tried 5 times, Don, to go and convince management to go and take on this. Well, we have hindsight now that computer became the Apple I, that now became literally, a multi-billion-dollar, one of the biggest companies that ever existed.
And the device you're working on right now.
Yeah, it's exactly. And actually, I am working on a Mac. So thank you, Wozniak. But imagine the person that said no at HP. And I'm sure it wasn't one. It might have been a committee of people who said no. Well, think about another idea. This one's a little further back. I wasn't alive for this one. But there's this guy, Tesla, not the car manufacturer. Okay, it was Nikola Tesla. He used to work for someone that came from a state that I used to live, and that was New Jersey. A guy named Thomas Alva Edison. Well, Edison employed Nikola Tesla, and Tesla actually came up with an idea as when he was working for Edison. It was called alternating current, AC. It's what you actually have in your house right now. But while Edison came up with DC, direct current. Well, to get technical in this, here's the idea. AC was a better idea, but Edison was so arrogant, and he said, hey, listen, not my idea. You can leave. And Tesla did. And because of that, there was a lot of things that got on. There's a lot of backstory about that. But ultimately, it was Tesla's idea, and it did win out. But Edison didn't really get the advantage of being able to take that idea internally. So when we think about what's potentially lost, think about this. Why is this decision important, right? What is our organization trying to do? And if this decision is made, what could we become? So I want you to really think about it. Is it a bad decision organizationally, or is it just bad for you individually as a leader? And it takes humility and perspective to look at this and say, well, what happens if we're wrong and we make this decision? What if we actually have some consensus and think about this and say, let's think about these possibilities. Why would this person that I entrust, like this IT director or Tesla or Wozniak, why would I put them in this position and all of a sudden they come up with an idea and we look and go, nope, not even going to listen, right? How's that play out, Don? When you
and I think when you tell those two stories about Tesla and Wozniak, it makes me think, are we missing those Teslas and those Wozniaks in our organization? And are we just closed off to listening? And that takes some introspection, but it is something you need to think about as a leader. Is who are those folks that may not have leadership titles, but are providing some good insight that we need to listen to. So I think about that and think about that in our own organization and think that is something that is certainly worthwhile contemplating. One of the questions though, or what kind of comes to mind with the IT director is I think that he may not have, again, had that influence, but I think you've got an opportunity to cultivate that if you bring in the right outside perspective. And I know we've talked about that before, but I do think that's important as we think about building consensus and we think about other entrepreneurs, as we like to say, bringing ideas to the team, thinking about validating those ideas and giving them some runway to play those out and allow some conversation around that as well. So, Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about some questions that I want to give leaders right now, Don,
Sure.
So we can really make this practical. I want leaders to ask themselves and say, who have you not included that should be included at the table, right? Who is not being heard at your organization? And I want you to really think about that. And I want you to picture who that person is, that guy or girl that you have not included, that literally has a voice, but may have been overlooked. And I want you to ask also, right, if you're really a humble leader, and say, what ideas have I as a leader overlooked that need to be reviewed again? What have I missed that now, with everything going on, should be brought back to the table? And beyond this, when we get past COVID, look at this and go, well, why have I not been able to listen? Have I been so busy? Have I been so focused on other things? Is it because it wasn't presented in a correct way? So these are the questions I really want you to think about and to make sure, do you have the right people in the room that even need to be at the table? And how many people in the room have you challenged and proposed new ideas and you've shot down? And Don, you know what? Take the last one. What about dissenters? I want you to talk about that.
Yes. So, one of the things I think about when you ask those questions is, thinking about dissenters, right? Thinking about, as if you go back to that example of Brian, most likely he knew going into that conversation that there would be dissenters. And I don't know the size of that committee, but there's going to be multiple people in that group, and not everybody is going to be on board immediately. And so he's got to make his case. And so when you think about dissenters or champions or the folks that you are going to be talking to about an idea, I think of it as, kind of mapping those decision makers. Who are the champions? Who are going to be the dissenters? Who's going to follow kind of the crowd? And kind of build a heat map around that. And so that'll vary depending on the kind of conversation, but as a prep to going into a strategic conversation, you need to map those decision makers and determine ahead of time how you're going to address each group, right?
Are
And
you
I
talking about a
think that,
plan though, Don? So hold on. You're telling me when you go into a meeting and there's a bunch of people that have titles or not, you're actually going to map a plan out so you know how to interact. You mean the same way? Let's go back to that. Like we talk to our wife different than we talk to some of our employees. That we're different than we talk to our
hopefully,
kids. We hope so, right?
right?
So we do this all the time in different situations where we actually address people. This is not being a chameleon and not being real and authentic, but we actually address people differently in different situations because we know how they listen to us or how we have to be heard or what to present. And that's the
Right.
thing. Sometimes this is so obvious it's missed that the opportunity to think about something and say, is this about me or is it about the organization? Is it about not just about winning or losing? It's about moving something forward that comes to the goal of what we're talking about. And one of the things, Don, that I see with clients that I work with is executives that are humble enough to say, hey, listen, you know what? There's improvement that I need in my communication skills. And I haven't seen a leader yet, no matter what level they're at, that can't improve the way they communicate, because you can tell that as lifestyles change and as we have multiple generations and other things where we're talking through Zoom, there's a lot of things you have to adapt to that leaders that have been leaders for 10, 15, 20 years, and then leaders that are literally 2 or 3 years into leading, they have different styles, but they still need to communicate the same ideas, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
how do we help them? And part of that is going to be through understanding where that it's not a win or loss. It's about consensus to go and be clear on the goal and make sure you implement that. And I want to talk about, you got anything else to say about that before we go to the next point?
No, I think let's move into, strategies around getting the team together on key decision.
Yeah. So it when you think about it, they have to know, again, we can't emphasize enough it's not about the mission that's on the wall and on the website. We're talking about something where you actually live it out. And there's companies here in Nashville and around the country that literally live theirs out, where they hire that way, they work that way, they actually go. And if you ask their employees, they actually talk about it in a way where they know what their organization does, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're a manufacturing or nonprofit. And I would challenge any organization, and we're going to talk about it, where I'm going to ask you to challenge them. So let's talk about an organization you might not know about, Sonia LaCour, but Sonia LaCour works for an organization I'm sure you know of. It's called Southwest Airlines. Now, hashtag not sponsored. Okay, I do not own stock in Southwest Airlines. It just happened to be a good story. I spoke to her late last year, and we talked about it. She is the VP of in-flight operations. She's in charge of 17,000 flight attendants. So let's just think about that. Your organization may not have 17,000 flight attendants and might not have 50,000 employees, but would it be harder to get 17,000 people to agree with you or 17? You're right. It depends, because you can't get 17 to agree because we can't get 5 to agree in our own household. So let's think about this. They were seen as the low-cost airline, and they were the underdog in the industry. But being seen as the underdog, what they said is that, you know what? We know who we are, right? We know who we are and who we aren't. So when somebody comes and says, hey, we should do in-seat entertainment and have first class and sell food, they said, it's not who we are. Okay, well, who are you? Their vision was to become the world's most loved, most flown, and most profitable airline. Now, people might say, hey, listen, they're not the lowest cost. Okay, but they didn't change their why. They just changed their how. Okay, because costs go up, they change their cost, but they're still not the most expensive airline. So when other airlines in the industry are struggling and they start to pivot and they start to switch, Southwest says, no, we know who we are. So you bring on your iPad, you bring on your phone if you want entertainment. If you want a meal, you buy it before you go on there, right? So when they were going to do something and they were going to do an overhaul of their uniforms, they actually invited their employees to actually submit designs. But hold on, their employees aren't designers. No, but they're the ones going to be wearing these designs. So they actually had people submit designs of which they picked, and people's voices were heard, and they went and said, you know what, here's what we're going to do. And their employees have been more pleased with the designs. Now, let's contrast that. What's the difference of actually asking about that? Well, there's an airline you may know of that actually sued their manufacturer because of the toxic fumes that came off of their uniforms. That was, I believe, is Delta Airlines. United Airlines said their uniforms were boring and blah. So just think about United and think about them getting sued and thinking about how many complaints came up that they had to wait till a class action suit was against a manufacturer of their uniforms. Who was not listening?
Yeah.
So when you talk about consensus, it's a lot easier, Don, to get it when you know exactly where you're going and where successful organizations are going toward and people that join them.
I think it's incredible that Southwest did that. Not only did they do that, but they actually took the information and used it and didn't just discard it, right? I mean, they brought some buy-in from their flight service staff by doing that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the beauty of what an organization, when you join it, you align with what they say they are, unless you're just getting a job, and then you really don't care about consensus because you're just there for a job. I'm
Right.
not saying that's a bad thing. What I'm saying is when there's alignment, it really works toward putting focus on why you're there. And when you align, it's a lot easier to get to consensus. So it's challenging. Surround yourself with great people, hire the right people, get the right story. And it doesn't matter how big or small your organization is. Sometimes you can't do it by, like you said before, Don, by being the one inside the organization, because it's hard to be a prophet in your own land, right? I tell my kids who I meet with and who I do, they're not impressed. But if I went and it was somebody they didn't know was doing the same thing, they'd be like, "Look, Dad, how cool that is!"
Right.
I was like, "Hold on, how
What I
does
do
that
every
work?"
day.
It's the same thing with your organization. When you say something in your organization, you're not seen sometimes as an expert, and
Right.
that's why you bring in experts that actually are as passionate about your mission and get excited about it and want to move it forward, because it's not just about work. Don, that's who I know I am, and that's why I work with you, because I know you care about people and about what goes on more than you care about what money is made.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do, and that's that's why I like working with you, Mark, and those are the kind of clients I like working with as well. Those that I can get strategic with and collaborate with, and that care about, that have missions larger than just I want to make X revenue. Okay, I mean that's not a bad goal, but why are you doing it? And that's what's fun about getting to work with our favorite clients, for sure. I've got an interesting story that kind of it contrasts the Southwest story a little bit in that yes, the company stuck to their guns and stuck to their mission, but it didn't. In the end, the company was not successful. And you think about that, and that's that. Okay, so I've got a mission. I know what it is. I know what I need to do to continue that mission, the decisions I need to make to do that. Yet we're not always going to have, the success at the end. That's unfortunate, and I'm sure you've seen that too, Mark. But I'm going to tell you a story about Excite. Okay, and Excite may not, and it's no longer a household name, but back in '99. Everybody knew the name Excite, along with all the other .com boom era companies that were coming about. So us techies, yes, we know Excite. Mark, I know you like your favorite browser, Netscape, which is no longer available. I know you first that. But
it's 21 years ago. Okay, I happen to have a really good memory when it comes to certain things. So tell us why what happened with Excite, because I'm interested to find out why sticking to your guns doesn't always work out successfully.
Right. Okay. Let me tell you about that. And I think this it talks to consensus as well, right? So here's what happened at Excite. So so Excite was doing a bunch of different things. One of the things they were doing was around search engines and searching on the internet. Okay. You may know another company by the name of Google. I think that's probably well known for most people on the call. Or around the world. And what was Google doing? Well, let me first tell you this. At the time, Google was not called Google. It was called Backrub. Let that sink in. I don't know why, whatever. Anyway, Google, the founders of Google, they come to Excite and they say, we want to sell you our search technology, which seems like a good opportunity. Maybe not, maybe let's kind of evaluate. At the time, the original sale price was $1 million. They actually reduced it to $750,000. It was still declined by Excite. So Excite had the opportunity to purchase Google for $750,000, and they passed. Unfortunately for Excite, they went bankrupt 2 years later. So 2001, they're done. They don't exist. Let me tell you about some of the backstory as to why the CEO, George Bell of Excite, decided to decline purchasing Google, or called Backrub at the time. So they did a technological bake-off of the two technologies: Excite's search technology, Google's search technology. And according to George Bell, the CEO, he couldn't see much of a differentiation. Okay. So in his mind, he didn't see that it was that different. Now there's different accounts. As you can imagine, two sides of the story. There was a clear differentiation from Google's perspective. And one of the theories or the reasons why the proposal was declined from the Google's perspective is that Google's product was too good. It returned too good of results. And in that time frame, Excite wanted to keep people on the page for ad revenue. If they returned the best results really quickly, people would leave the page, ad revenue will go down. That could impact the bottom line. That may or may not be true, but I want to give you another reason why from George Bell's perspective. He had a conversation with Excite's technical founder because one of the criteria for that sale was that Google would come in, replace all of the technology at Excite and their technology team as well. That was a requirement of the sale. If you're going to buy us, we're going to come in and essentially rip out the guts, the soul of Excite, right? And the reason people came to work at Excite was they believed in the mission. They probably believed in that technical founder. Maybe they were brought in by the CEO. Maybe it was, for a variety of different reasons, they came to Excite to be with Excite and work on their mission, not to necessarily work on Google's mission. And so George Bell saw that if it went through with this sale, he would be undermining the mission of Excite. And so he chose not to. He said, you know what, I'm going to stick with the team that I have. I'm going to stick with the technology that I have because I believe in the team and the technology, and I believe in what we're doing, and I'm going to continue operating that way. And yet 2 years later, they had to declare bankruptcy. So even as you get consensus and as you move forward with 100% agreement in that choice, you may not always end up in the position you thought you might and filing bankruptcy. So obviously that happened, quite a long time ago, but I think it's applicable today in that you have to make a decision. You have to move forward and do something. If you stick to your mission, it may not be success. How have you seen that play out, Mark? And how do you bring and coach leaders through something like that?
Well, it's sticking to your mission is a dangerous prospect. But I want to talk about failure one time, real quick. Everybody that has a cell phone, right, has literally have the result of many failures that happened to get to where it is now, right? There was Newton with the PDA. There was people with Palm Pilots. The things that you're using now are the things we laugh about. We're like, oh, remember what that thing was not so working so well? And remember flip phones? And the thing is that with Excite, right, they thought they were like, hey, they can only see as far as this is as far as we can go, right? We need to keep people on the page. And Google had a different mission. Google and called Backrub. And, just thinking about how that played out. Now, sometimes you're going to make a decision and they're not always going to be success stories where you go off into the sunset. Mm-hmm. But part of being a leader is making those tough decisions that literally people think are crazy, but turn out well. So the HP people made a bad decision and turned away literally billions of dollars. But the Excite people didn't see an opportunity or didn't want to change their mission, and they went bankrupt. Okay. Two important stories about sticking to what you say you're supposed to do. HP may regret it, and so may Excite. So what's your role as a leader? So let's ask a poll. And let's find out from the people that are actually on the webinar. Let's ask them, why do they think their organization, or if they're answering for a friend, why they can't come to an agreement on some of the biggest decisions at your own or your friend's organization? Now, this is an anonymous poll, so we actually don't know. So
we won't attribute these to a specific company, so don't worry about that. You can answer for yourself or a friend.
Yeah, but we'd love everybody to be able to answer that poll because we really want to hear what you see and hear in the industry and what's going on. And as we let people kind of work on that poll a little bit, Don, when you see about the biggest obstacles, do people just come to you and say, hey, by the way, we're having this problem? Or do you have to actually uncover it through some kind of discovery?
No, usually people say we're having this problem. but that's usually not the problem they're having. So that's really what it comes at. Like, I've got this problem, and I don't like to just throw out a technical solution. That's not the kind of consultant that I am. So I start asking more questions and try to dig and uncover. And more often than not, what they first came to me with is not the actual problem that we need to solve, right? And I know you do that too, but from a technology perspective, sure, I can throw, okay, well, you need this, here's this tech, I can sell it to you, great, move on. But how about we solve a business problem? So usually the question I come back with is, okay, you say you have this problem, what are you trying to solve? And let's start digging into it.
You know, it's funny as we look at the poll, right? It was all over the place, and I think it's settled down. So we're going to close the poll right now, and it's pretty close though. But look at that, Don. What do you think?
Well, you know, it's interesting as we look at the results. The two highest, lack of clarity and fear of making the wrong decision. That's not surprising, but miscommunication by management is pulling up a close third there.
Right. So let's talk about those real quickly, since we're getting this from our live audience. Is fear of making the wrong decision and lack of clarity. Okay, well, hold on. Well, that's two totally different things. Lack of clarity, or maybe they are the same things. Hold on. I'm afraid of making the wrong decision because I won't decide on what to do because it might be the wrong decision, right? So that Excite decision, okay, but then we can look at the Southwest decision to include their employees. That was the right decision, where United thought it wasn't. They were like, hey, you're not a designer. Don't do it. You shouldn't be touching this. Right. That didn't work out well for them. But the lack of clarity is even more interesting for me, because who's not making it clear and who's not understanding it? So what are you seeing, especially with technical things that are a little bit more difficult for people to actually grasp that they're not technical?
Yeah, well, I think that's that can be a big area that is a big area for improvement, I think, around for IT leaders. You can't think like an IT guy or gal, right? And that may be some of where this lack of clarity can come from in the technical realm. If you go into a conversation with business leaders and you're talking tech lingo, well, that's not going to be clear at all, and you're probably going to lose the audience very quickly, and whatever you were asking for gets lost in the technical mumbo jumbo, and that may be kind of that lack of clarity. I think there's also something though that speaks to how how the leader is providing clarity for the followers, right? And is that happening effectively? And so I don't know. What do you think about that, Mark? Because I want to pivot on that a little bit and think, as a leader, I want to prove, literally, I want you to prove that it's clear what you're asking for, right? Like, so the thing is, here's a quick thing to do, right? When you go, I want you to ask your company, right? Ask your individuals and say, listen, what do we do as an organization, right? But I don't want you to ask them in a group, because then there's that whole everybody looking around and things like that. I don't want it to be on a Zoom call. I want you to ask each individual, say, what do we do? And in your mind, you should be really clear on what you do as a leader. So really evaluate yourself first. If you say, we're a manufacturer, we produce steel for cars, is that really what you do? Is that the only thing you do? Is that what the mission and vision of the owners or the organization is? So be really clear, because as you ask people, and you say, what's your role in that? You got to be really careful for the answers. But these aren't answers that you can just be able to get. And I'm not asking you just to ask the department heads. I'm asking you to ask the new people that just started at the organization, because they're the ones that said, I need a job. I want to be part of this. Now ask them what you do, right? Yeah, I think it's important to ask that as soon as they start, right? Because I think you will get a perspective that you may not have. What is the outside world truly seeing as why they would join your organization? What do you do? Who are you?
Right. And that's so I think as we segue into shifting perspective, and it's not about just me, it's about us, which means when I say that, I'm thinking it's about the organization as a whole, because believe it or not, right? Your most limited asset, and I know you've heard this, but do we act that way, is time. I can make more money. I can be able to do many more things. But I literally, the time you're spending on this webinar, the reason that we actually put a lot of energy and a lot of time into this, and the reason we're doing this to the excellence that we can do it, it's not about us, it's about you. You're spending the exact same amount of time here. So the shifting perspective is that I've got to be about giving to others first, and then be able to get because of what we offer. And that's, I wanted to go beyond nonprofits. I wanted to think about it as an organization and as a person, because Don and I both don't work with organizations. We actually work with humans that actually work inside organizations. Organizations are an entity, but people are what? And I want to challenge you to think that if you're entrusted with others, if you're entrusted to other people in your organization that literally puts their trust, not just for a paycheck, but for direction, but also you as a leader, with a title or not, they're actually looking up to you, how you handled COVID, how you handle the work-family balance, how you handled schooling your kids, all those other things that aren't part of your job. How are you actually letting that play out in your life that shows that you are more than just one-dimensional? And that's the thing. It's like, we want to go and compartmentalize our life and say, this is just who we are. And I'm like, I'm sorry, your employees and others see you for way more than that. So I want to challenge each one of you to have a personal mission statement. And I know this is off script, Don, because we weren't, but I just happened to think about it. And I was like, why are we not having a personal mission statement? Because the reason you can't be clear to others is because you're not clear to yourself. And again, this isn't soft, gushy, ZZ woo-woo, like stuff. This is something where Don and I both know, and the reason I'm friends with Don is because we value our families. And before we had families, we valued our spouses. And before that, I valued my own life and a lot of other things that I was focused on that weren't just about me.
Right.
And at the company mission, I want you to think about what this is about and see if you align with it and your people are clear on it. And everything can't be a priority, and how this is going to, how you can only really focus on one thing at a time and have to say no to more things than you say yes to. But knowing what you present for consensus has to be really, really critical.
Yeah, that's important. And it's something that I think can also change over time, but it requires evaluation, right? I mean, one of the things, Mark and I are recently working on together is kind of that, personal mission statement. And I think it's important for you to know that as a leader, but for you also to know that as your for your organization and what your employees are signing up to be a part of. And so that's when I want to make sure that's not missed in that question that you're asking. Who are we? What do we do? And whom do we serve? Okay. I mean, you could even flip that around to be personal. Who am I? What do I do? And who do I serve? And I think you could ask that individually and answer that outside of the company. But that's critical to be clear on that, so that you have your mission, you have your why, and then you can move forward on the how. But Mark, before we're running close on time here. We're at about 45 minutes. I want to get to one more question that attendees can ask, and then we're going to throw up that next poll there as well in a little bit. But can you talk about kind of what we just talked about, but dive into a little bit more about the potential gap between mission and responsibilities in an organization, and what the employees may not be hearing and what they'll have to do with that?
Yeah, it's easy to go and look as an employee and say it's a leader's role to make sure everything's really clear. And that's not a truth, right? The reason good leaders look to people inside the organization to see things that they could not see. Right. That's why when you hire great people and you entrust them and you listen to what they say and you have a reporting structure that actually allows them not to just talk to you once a year at a meeting because, oh, I'm the CEO, so I can't. What it is about making sure that when you hear something as a staff member or an employee, that you translate it back to the mission of the organization and make sure that you're like, challenge. I mean, you literally have to challenge leadership, or at least your peers, to go and say, is this what I heard? Is this really what we're doing? Is this what can be done? Now, and I'll bring up an example of when mismanagement comes in an organization, that's because people are following orders. When something doesn't feel right? Consensus doesn't mean selling out your moral integrity to do what you feel is wrong. It's important to understand that this is not giving up who you are. That's when you're supposed to leave an organization. This
Right.
is a decision to make that says, are we going to pick brown or blue for our new corporate logo? And we can't get an agreement on that versus, hey, we're going to go and change the way we're doing accounting or something else. That's not what we're talking about, right? It would have been easier for Brian to leave the organization and go, hey, listen, you're not going to do this IT initiative. I think it's important enough. It's been more important for me to leave than to stay here and watch you crash the train and lose all this data.
Right.
Okay. So that's the challenge, is that when you hear something, it's the leader's responsibility to make sure it's explained simply enough and clear enough. That does not mean dumbing it down. It means making sure it's clear enough that people can understand and then validating how clear it is. And sometimes, Don, what we've seen consistently is we're brought in our different roles to be able to clarify that message, because explaining it isn't always easy for somebody in it as a leader or as people that are in it every day. We see it from a different perspective.
And I think, I completely agree. And I think we have the opportunity and sometimes the distance to allow, disagreement, but consent, right? So we're consenting to move forward with an idea, but we may disagree as well. And I think that's an important point to make, is that, yes, we like to come in and help clarify that mission, but you may not, as we talked about, with 100% agreement, you may not get there. And you may need to be okay with people that are consenting to move forward with an idea, but may have some disagreement and lodge that disagreement, but still support the mission of the organization. As long as, like you said, Mark, as long as it's not an integrity issue or something that's going against everything you believe in, okay, maybe I don't think this is the best approach, but we've made the decision, or the decision has been made. We're going to move forward with that and support the organization.
So let's have some takeaways, right? Let's do a poll. We're going to do another poll right here and ask you, which of the questions we asked today are you going to use? Because we're not just here to go and talk about things. What we're here really is about to see how you're going to apply this.
Yep.
We promised you in the beginning that there would be questions. We wanted you to think about what this was. And now here's this opportunity for you to ask these questions. Here's some of the questions. Who hasn't been included and should be now? Is that a question that you're going to start asking yourself or others? Mm-hmm. What ideas have I overlooked or need to be reviewed again? Who are we? What do we do? Whom do we serve? And ask individually on that. And have I bridged the gap between the leader's words and the organization's mission? So we have that poll up. Is that being, is everybody get to see that poll, hopefully?
Yeah, it's being shared live. So we'll leave that up for a little bit. Hopefully everybody can see it and submit answers there. While we wait for those to come in, as we sort of kind of wrap up our time, I wanted to give just a little bit of time for those poll questions to come in. And then I see, looks like they're,
okay,
Mark,
let me reset the poll. I got it. I'll do it again. Hold on.
Uh-oh. Technical difficulties.
Exactly. It's okay.
So as Mark was talking about, while I let that poll go and those answers come in, as I think about building consensus and building agreement and moving forward on ideas, those are the, when I think about the best kind of clients that I have and the kind of clients that I like to work with, and I know Mark does as well, is, they are not transactional, but rather strategic. And that may sound weird coming from an IT guy, but I'm not in it just for the technology. I'm in it to help leaders of organizations solve problems. That happens to be with technology or cybersecurity solutions. But I like and enjoy being in those strategic conversations. And so I'm not just going to throw technology at a solution, but I'm going to help those folks achieve business goals, whatever those happen to be. And that's why I don't generally start with, this is what we have to offer. This is it. It's a box of technology. Here you go. No, let's talk about what you're trying to achieve, and let's see how technology and security can help you achieve those goals. And the solution to that is going to be different based on the type of client, type of industry, and what you're actually trying to achieve. Mark, what are you seeing out there? What kind of clients do you like working with?
Don, it's the same thing. It's asking questions, right? what this whole webinar was about: asking questions to yourself and asking questions to others. But here's the difference: not being afraid of the answers, right? So some of this stuff that we're going over, Don, it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
Asking yourself and actually hearing that you're really not communicating well. Okay. I've been a speaker. I've done webinars. I've been a leader for a long time, and hearing there's still things that I have to change. It's not always easy to absorb that, because it's humbling to say, hold on, I thought I was doing well, especially when your words of affirmation, you love hearing accolades and you don't always get those. So sometimes you need to do it for somebody that you really respect. And that's where I think, Don, I know the way you treat people. I know the way you interact, and you don't make it just about business, but you got to work with somebody that really cares about who you are as a person first. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but just think about it. If you want a transactional relationship with a vendor, then they're going to go and sell you a box of goods, and they're going to be like, here it is. And I don't know who you are, and I don't really care, because I'm here to sell you a box of goods. I really don't care when I get my coffee, but who that person is. But you know what? Now that coffee place is actually asking me, does that person actually interact with you? How are they actually? Hold on, I was just going to get coffee. So if that can be in coffee, think about, as a leader or as somebody that's influencing others, how are you being heard? And how are you being vulnerable enough to realize that there's things to learn? Part of my role is to go and help you individually understand your role better, understand your people better, but put tools and data around that, so we can help you through coaching and some strategies, so you can see around corners. You can actually turn conversations into outcomes. And Don, as we kind of look at the poll here, it's
pretty much split 4 equal ways. So, which is good. I think that means that we hit on some good points, and I think people will, take those questions and hopefully leverage them in their organization for themselves personally. That's great to see.
I want to do one more thing as we kind of wrap up here. And again, I want to give some time back to everybody. You want to put that slide up, just our last.
Yep.
And then think about this. What we talked about is a pivot, right? We're here to help, right? I want this webinar. I knew this webinar wasn't going to solve every single problem, but I want you to hopefully think about things in a different way that you didn't think about before, and have the opportunity to reach out to us. Don and I, love to reach out to you on LinkedIn. We'd love to have a phone call. You're going to be getting a PDF. Love to set some time for us to have a dialogue and just at least talk for 30 minutes to go over some things. But here's really the crux of the issue when it comes down to it. You got to ask yourself, because this isn't the easiest thing to do, but it's easier to do it with somebody else that's going to help you. What do you need to learn, unlearn, or relearn to make this change possible? Because it's really...
Say that again, Mark.
Okay, so what do you need to, as a leader or as someone part of an organization, what do you need to learn, unlearn, and relearn to make this change possible? Because if you think about it, if you really think about what's going on, it starts with you. It's easy to point at the organization. It's easy to point to the employees. It's easy to point at leadership, but it's got to start with you, because these questions are you seeing inside first, and then being able to see what you need to change next. And that's the thing. We are in 2 different industries, Don, but it's still about people. It's still about protecting them from some of the ideas that are in their head that keep them from moving ahead. And we want to help organizations really achieve through the people that have been giving their daily lives to making this stuff happen.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are out of time. So, please, as Mark said, reach out to us. We would love to work with you and help you build consensus and agreement and moving forward in your organization. And you will be receiving an email after this meeting with our direct contact information, as well as the information in the download that we discussed. And if you didn't write down those questions, we will answer those, have those questions in the download, as well as some of the questions we received live on our webinar today. Thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.